Thank you.
I beg to move that this House do now adjourn.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. Sir Liam Fox.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I would like to begin this evening by thanking my constituents in Portishead whose dogged determination not to be treated as supine cash cows has led to this debate, which I am proud to have achieved on their behalf. The residents at Port Marine, a beautiful development in Portishead that transformed derelict industrial land into an extremely desirable place to live, these residents bought their properties, some leasehold and some freehold, with an external property management company managing some communal parts. My honourable friend the Minister will recognise in this tale a situation mirrored up and down the country, with uncertainty about bills and charges at one end of the spectrum and the inability to sell properties which are effectively valued at nothing at the other. There are two key issues here: the variable service charge and the fixed rent charge. I'm also grateful to Sebastian O'Kelly of the Leasehold Knowledge Partnership, who described the situation thus: it is an arrangement cooked up by developers and councils. It means developers have a management company and income stream that they can sell on to management companies such as Firstport, and the council saves money by not adopting these open spaces. Meanwhile, the often younger buyers of these properties end up paying council tax and the management charges, while older locals, often living in more valuable housing, pay to the council only. The situation is increasingly being described, Madam Deputy Speaker, by what it is, namely a fleecehold. Residents initially wrote to me about the increase in the variable service charge to levels which they believed were unreasonable. Attempts to gain transparency on the costs go back several years, including a face-to-face meeting between Firstport and Portishead residents in 2019. The issue affects around 1,000 of my constituents, both freeholders and leaseholders. In effect, residents have complained that the amount they're paying doesn't match the amount of land being managed by Firstport or the level of the work they undertake on the Port Marine estate. It has also been difficult to get transparency from Firstport when residents have requested a breakdown of their costs for managing the properties and land. On the 3rd of November 2023, I joined constituents representing the Portishead Management Charge Action Group, along with 2 representatives of North Somerset Council and 2 representatives of Firstport, for a walk around the Port Marine estate. This was to look at the areas managed by Firstport and those areas managed by North Somerset Council. We found that very small areas of the estate are managed by Firstport, for which they charge at least £440 per annum, which seems particularly high. This produces around £220,000 of income per year for Firstport. Ideally, residents would like to see the land managed by North Somerset Council, which looks after large parts of the estate already. Naturally, however, the Council would like to receive a substantial sum from Firstport to transfer these duties, but with no agreement forthcoming, it's easy to see why my constituents find themselves in something of a trap. I'll give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
Can I commend the Honourable Gentleman for North Somerset for bringing this forward? He's right to bring this issue to the attention of the House. Does the Right Honourable not agree that whilst the Leaseholder Advisory Service gives free advice for England and Wales, as it should, the advice is not granted in all situations? So your constituents, the Right Honourable Members' constituents, when they sought advice, were in many cases were unsure of where they stand without costly legal advice. And the Government and the Minister must provide much more clarity across the board.
Well, I'm grateful to the Honourable Member. Madam Deputy Speaker, I will go on to set out just how horrendous some of these charges are and how it can be very difficult to get legal redress for my constituent. It's no doubt a situation that the Minister has heard described on a number of occasions. Now, we all understand that communal land must be managed for the benefit of all. No one disputes that. But it needs to be done in a way that is fair and equitable, predictable and transparent. And currently, the position provides none of these. I'll give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
He's absolutely right that many of these arrangements were never made clear to people when they purchased the properties, and too often developers have taken a shortcut to actually create a secondary income stream when actually they should be paying some lump sum to the local authority to take over the responsibilities. And it's a double whammy for those who are on the end of it, isn't it?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I swear that there was no collusion here, but the honourable gentleman takes me very neatly onto an even more horrendous example than the one that I've already set out, and that relates to fixed rent charges. Now, firstly, let me just set out to the House the history by which property companies can fleece freeholders by this mechanism. Across the country as a whole, rent charges are rare, but they do exist in parts of England such as around Bath and Bristol and Manchester. A real problem can arise when a buyer or their conveyancing solicitor fails to spot their presence in the title deeds. Why? Because rent charges, which were introduced mainly in the late 19th and early 20th century, were put in place when landowners wanted to sell land at a reduced cost to a developer. They would sell the land on a freehold basis, but would retain a legal interest in the land and charge an annual fee or rent charge, which is in place forever. The rent charge was typically, historically, between £2 and £10, which was quite a lot in those days, but has been regarded as nominal in recent years. While many rent charges have fallen dormant, others have been bought up by property companies who are now ruthlessly enforcing payment. The rent owner is entitled to recover any sums due, but does not have to send a reminder to the freeholder, and as I understand it, is legally entitled to impose a penalty after 40 days when the account inevitably falls into arrears, usually by taking out a statutory lease on the home as security. That would then make the property almost impossible to sell unless the freeholder pays thousands to redeem the lease. And this, Madam Deputy Speaker, is outrageous. Let me outline the issue with particular respect to Portishead. In 2011, solicitors acting on behalf of Crest Nicholson, the original landowner of the development, wrote to Firstport, then known as Consort, advising them that the fixed rent charge should be reduced to £1. When Firstport shared this information with some residents and reduced the charge accordingly, they didn't do it with all residents and continued to invoice some to the tune of between £100 and £150 per annum. And these residents were later refunded. But after trying to renege on this agreement at the end of 2022, Firstport informed residents in December 2023 that they again intended to start charging £100 to £150 per year for the fixed rent charge. Now, Firstport have argued that because no deed of variation was entered into to confirm this reduction, meaning the agreement to reduce the fixed rent charge was not legally binding, that they can effectively do what they like. Firstport, needless to say, residents who were not advised in 2011 that they needed to enter into a deed of variation or log the change with the land registry are extremely unhappy. Recently, under pressure from residents, Crest Nicholson and myself and Firstport agreed to keep the fixed rent charge at £1 per annum, providing residents entered into a deed of variation. It's instructive to see what Crest Nicholson have made of this debacle. On February the 9th, they told me that, and I quote, "Crest's view is that the decision being taken by Firstport to unilaterally reimpose the fixed rent charge of the properties at Port Marine is not only unfair, but the underlying mechanism within the transfer is potentially open to challenge in the courts. This is because the annual charges they're proposing to claim, that's between £100 and £150 a year, are not what a court would consider to be nominal amounts, which is a requirement for the fixed rent charge to be lawful under the Rent Charges Act 1977. Interestingly, Crest also told me that, quote, "Many of the residents wrongly believe that this money is being paid in exchange for Firstport performing a service. Firstport is already able to recover its costs for enforcing covenants from the variable element of the charges, so Firstport's claim that this is the purpose is at best questionable." Now, following a meeting I had with Cress Nicholson at the end of March, they have now made it clear that they will no longer be handing out contracts to First Port. So let me turn to this deed of variation. First Port initially quoted residents £300 plus VAT to enter into the deed of variation, offering this as a discounted price. In their letter to me of the 7th of March 2024, they said that their legal fees for entering into any type of deed of variation would normally be £500 plus VAT. In other words, this was a bargain that my constituents should jump at so that they would not be forced to pay £150 a year. They could pay First Port £500 as a one-off payment to prevent this happening in the future. I think many of us would regard that as extortion. What this whole saga has done is caused my constituents a great deal of stress, but despite that, they've indicated that this £150 is tolerable, meaning that they are willing but not happy to enter into the deed of variation and be done with the whole saga. And First Port have set a deadline of the 30th of June this year for residents to enter into this deed of variation. So, we have a variable service charge which can be raised and enforced without any clear and transparent links with services actually being undertaken. Then we have the truly horrendous situation where rent charges, which have no relation whatsoever to any service being provided, can be raised and applied, effectively with the threat of making properties unsellable, and the only means of escape is for residents to enter into deeds of variation at a price determined by, guess who, First Port. Let me be clear, Madam Deputy Speaker, that I regard this as daylight robbery, a historical anomaly which has no place in our modern society. And I'm sure that First Port will not be the only property company acting in this way up and down our country. And I ask my honourable friend, the Minister, as his department introduces regulations subsequent to the passing of the Regeneration and Levelling Up Act and looking at leasehold reform, to see how quickly we can redress these wholly unacceptable positions and consign them to the dustbin of history, which is where they belong.
Minister Lee Rowley.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's a great pleasure to respond to this short debate and to have the opportunity to be able to talk about this hugely important issue for so many colleagues around the House. And over the past few months, as we've been talking about leasehold, more and more colleagues have come up to me to highlight some of the iniquities, some of the problems, some of the challenges that they are seeing in their constituencies. And I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend from North Somerset for highlighting the particular issues that he has experienced. And I'm very sorry to hear about Port Marine and the challenges that the residents there have been facing. Whilst I obviously can't comment too much on individual cases, I think it's absolutely vital and important that we hear individual examples, because around the country, I have heard particular examples of particularly egregious extortions and problems within this framework, and it's one of the reasons precisely why we are bringing forward leasehold reform, because we recognise that there needs to be change. Leasehold can work in some places, and some elements of it can be successful. But the problem, as my right honourable friend has just outlined, is that there is too much bad practice in the leasehold sector. There are too many distortions within that tenure. There are too many inefficiencies which can be exploited. And frankly, there are too many rent seekers in there who are trying to exploit those distortions and those inefficiencies. As Conservatives, and I know that colleagues on the other side of the House also feel strongly about this as well, but as Conservatives, we are nothing if we are not seeking to smash monopolies. We are nothing if we are not seeking to stop rent seeking. We are nothing if we are not seeking to make markets more perfect, and we are nothing if we don't stand up for the little guy. And it is stories like my right honourable friend and certain from North Somerset have highlighted today, which highlights the reason why we are doing this. And absolutely, there is a way to go in making this market more perfect, but that is exactly what we are trying to do. The Leasehold and Freehold Bill will bring into law many reforms to better protect and to empower leasehold. Existing leaseholders will find it easier and cheaper to extend their lease or to buy their freehold. Reforms to the cost regimes for enfranchisement and right to manage claims will make them more accessible, enabling leaseholders to take control of their building and therefore their future. I'm very happy to vote on it.
I'm very grateful to him for giving way, but the issue of the rent charges also applies to freeholders, so it's not just leaseholders who are the victims here. And an amendment to the 1977 Rent Charges Act would be able to deal with this once and for all. Can I encourage my honourable friend to look at amendments when we bring forward legislation on this? And can I say that if the government doesn't want to bring forward such an amendment to the 1977 Act, I will be more than happy to do so as an amendment myself.
Friend, he is absolutely right that there are both impacts to freeholders and leaseholders. They impact different types of property and different types of tenure in different way. The 1977 Act that he rightly references, some elements of those rent charges will be extinguished by that Act in 2033. But we also, and that's been in law for before I was born, but there are also a number of things that also need addressing. And one of the reasons why the Leasehold and Freehold Bill is being brought forward is to address some of those. And I will come to some specific points from my right honourable friend in a moment, if I may. As he has outlined, there are two main areas that this discussion that Port Marine has highlighted. There's a whole range of reforms which are necessary across the leasehold sector and which the bill is seeking to address. But I want to just touch on the two main ones which he has indicated, variable service charge and then the rent charge point, which he just quite rightly highlighted a little bit more. On variable service charges, the bill as it stands will absolutely make progress in a number of these areas. It will not fix what has happened in the past, but it absolutely seeks to minimise the chance of it happening again. Unjustified increases in variable service charges are not acceptable. And any service charges should be transparent and they should be communicated effectively, and there should be a clear route to challenge if things go wrong. The bill currently ensures that all leaseholders will receive key minimum financial and non-financial information on a regular basis, which includes a standardised service charge demand form, an annual report of charges, timely provision of service charge accounts, and the right to obtain other relevant info. That is a significant step forward from the discussions that I've had both with leaseholders and freeholders in my constituency, but also I know from having spoken with colleagues all around the House who have similar issues. We are also taking measures on service charges to ensure that leaseholders are not subject to unjustified legal costs and can claim for the first time their own costs from landlords where appropriate when they go through the tribunal process and they win. So there will be a significant change on variable service charges coming as and when this bill is passed through both houses. On the specifics around fixed rent charges, the bill also introduces a new framework to empower homeowners and to hold estate management companies to account for the service they provide. There will need to be more transparency of information. There will be a new legal requirement that estate management charges must be reasonable, and there will be the ability to challenge through the tribunal for the first time excessive costs and to ensure that estate management companies can be held to account. These measures will also cover admin fees, including deeds of variation, to the point that my right honourable friend highlighted, through these powers which will be taken. And there will be a right for the first time, as I say, to apply to the tribunal for both redress and, if there is a strong view and a view which can be proved that the managing agent who is in charge of these is doing something inappropriate or is not fulfilling their duties, they can apply to a tribunal to seek to have a substitute manager appointed, which will for the first time give the opportunity for residents to highlight where there are problems and also to remove people who are consistently causing problems within that process. And as I said in committee stage of this bill, we recognise both from that stage and from the debates that have been had previously in this House on this bill about the strength of feeling of colleagues. That has been reiterated tonight by my right honourable friend in this debate and from the contributions from other honourable and right honourable members. And we are considering further whether we can look at this area in more detail. And I hope, whilst I can't do tonight, I hope I will be able to say more soon from the government benches about how we do that. So, to conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker, my right honourable friend is absolutely right to raise these issues, both in an individual case and to highlight the key challenges which we are seeing on a day-to-day basis about how and when this system doesn't work and how and when this system doesn't work for Port Marine. And I hope there is restitution. I hope there is a solution which comes as soon as possible. But in recognising those individual examples where things are not working, the government is taking action in a very conservative way to recognise that we have to deal with these monopolies, we have to smash the rent seekers, and we have to make sure we remove distortions to make these markets more perfect and to ensure that there won't be another Port Marine in 10, 15, 20 years' time when this bill comes forward, because we will be significantly improving this market, we'll be significantly improving leasehold, we'll be significantly changing rent charges, so that those people who quite rightly want to buy their house, want to have the benefits of owner occupation, everything that we want to do to empower people, they will gain real control over their future as a result of these changes, and we look forward to colleagues supporting it more as it goes through its final stages in the House in the coming weeks ahead.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. As may as that opinion say aye.
Aye.
I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order. Order.
The proceeding has ended. 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 The proceeding has ended.